guys, welcome to this video. We're looking at Wi-Fi authentication options in this. We've done multiple videos on this before, on the different types in more detail, but I thought I'd give you an overview of all the different main ones to look at. So we're going to do PSK, both WPA2 and WPA3, and then multi-passphrase, PPSK, which is now being introduced to the GUI very shortly after I made a video on this, where you had to do it by the CLI, but perhaps I'll remake that. Then Enterprise, WPA EAP is also known, where you need a username password, and this is often used within corporate environments. And again, there's a video available for that. Then I talk about open versus the newer standard, which is OWE, which gives you that extra layer of encryption on top. And then Hotspot, which again I've done multiple videos on, so it's just a very high level look. Just to give you, if you don't know what Hotspot is, and you're looking for which one of these to use for your network, then you may, hopefully it'll give you the right pointers of where to look. So as I mentioned, any video I've done on these before will be in I'll try and put everything in the description below for you to check out, and also I'll export the configs of each of these and try and separate them out between each type, so you can, and I'll put those on my website and I'll link in the description as well, so you can go to there and copy and paste out what you need. So if you want to just use Enterprise, for example, set it up how I've set it up on this video, then you can just use that. However, yeah, probably better off looking, if you wanted to use any one of these in more detail, check out those independent videos on them as well. Before we do get going, I will just go show you, if you may or may not be aware, I've recently launched a course which I've called Mastering MikroTik. It's basically an entry level look at MikroTik, but it goes through various key things I think are important. So the idea is that if you're unfamiliar, you may have networking background, you may have used MikroTik slightly in the past, but you really want to get to grips with it, then it should go through everything from what is MikroTik and how you navigate from the beginning through the basic setups, from looking at the firewall, and then what's probably more key for today is this Wi-Fi CATSMAN setup, and then the VLANs, which you would also use in alongside the Wi-Fi if you're doing multiple SSIDs. I've got an offer on at the moment for 20% off, so check that out if you want. Link is in the description below, and yeah, hopefully it will give you everything you need to get going. Okay, just before we get going, I'll just give you an overview of how I've configured it so far. We've got very simple bridge. We've got some VLANs on there. As I mentioned, the reason I'm using VLANs is because it's more scalable, and it would be more in line if you're using CATSMAN. We're not doing CATSMAN, as I said before, because just again for simplicity, but all the configuration we're applying today can easily be applied to your CATSMAN setup as well. So yeah, I've just got these 3 networks. One I'm going to use as my management, and then I've got these other 2 which I can use for my clients. The machine that I'm accessing it on is going to connect to via Wi-Fi. I'm accessing it through its WAN interface. Just so that means, and as you can see, I've got no internet access at the moment, so that just means that I will be able to connect and disconnect without disrupting any of my ability to stream. So what I've done is, on the Wi-Fi side, I've got obviously my 2 built-in interfaces. I've added these additional ones. Now this is the only difference between this and CATSMAN. If it was using CATSMAN, then these would be applied via the CATSMAN configuration, where additional SSIDs will be, you would specify which configuration to use for that. So I'll explain why I've got these here when we come to use them. So they're disabled at the moment because for the first examples I don't need them. I've then got this main configuration here. Now if you see my previous videos, I always like to differentiate between 2 gig and 5 gig, and I've just kept it on one SSID for this example, just again so when I'm switching between all the different methods which I'm going to show you, it's just less set up in between, just to keep things a bit neater. However, I have on the actual interfaces themselves is where I'm specifying the channels, because obviously you can't have the same configuration profile for both 2.4 and 5 gig if you're specifying the channel information. So I've actually assigned those directly to the interfaces themselves. Again, this is also so it's easier just to make changes quicker and be able to show you the different setups. I have this config guest as well, which we'll use when we come to do the hotspot, and then this OWE, which again is disabled at the moment, and I would explain why I'm using that. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I will try and export the config for each one of these individually rather than just the whole lot, so it's confusing, and then you can then pick and choose which ones you want to use. As I mentioned, channels, the usual channels I like to use, and I've applied those directly to the interfaces themselves. And then I've created all these multiple security profiles, just so it's easier for me to swap between each one. So it will hopefully become clearer as we switch between, and I explain why I'm doing certain configurations. So we're not necessarily configuring stuff from scratch. I'm just going to show you some pre-configured stuff and explain what's happening there as we go. So firstly, we're going to look at PSK, or pre-shared key. Now I'm starting with this one because it is probably the most common one, I would say. It's what you would use on your home router, and it's one that people would probably default to if they're just doing want to give themselves some quick Wi-Fi access. There is some differences recently with the authentication side of it. So if I open up my pre-configured PSK one, very simple. We're using WPA2 PSK. The side for the encryption we're using is this CCMP. Now we have this GCMP, which I'll talk about when we look at the WPA3 side of it. But yeah, TKIP we should never use anymore. TKIP is legacy stuff, and it predates these authentications. So this is basically, as it stands, pre-shared key. It's a passphrase, which I believe has to be 8 characters or more, which is known between the user and the administrator of the Wi-Fi. So you give this out to your users to be able to authenticate. They will get asked for a single password when they connect, and then the devices will remember this password. So if this password changes and an older device reconnects, it will then say you need to re-enter the password. So very simple. If we just jump on my wireless here, just connect. As you can see, it's going to ask for a password. I type in hello world 123, as you can see there, and then next, and we're connected. If we go into registration, you can see here I am there, connected, and there's my authentication type. It's WPA2 PSK, which is what I've selected up here. Just in case you're not aware, the reason you can see that password there is because I've got under settings, I've got by default hide password is ticked, which would be like that. It's just a handy little feature within Winbox. You can just untick that, and then you can actually see the passwords typed in, so you don't have to retype in, and I can actually show you exactly what I mean, why I'm typing in hello 123, because that's what I've got set there. The other thing to mention as well is my data path. This is where I'm setting my different VLANs. I'm going to use VLAN 20 for everything, unless you need to use VLAN 30, and I'll explain what I'm going to use that for. Just another little bit of information. I'll just do a IP config, and I'll show you the network I'm on now. There you go. So I'm now on that VLAN 20, which I've set as the 3rd octet. So that's PSK. Very simple. You're probably all very familiar with that already, whether or not you've ever configured it in MikroTik or not. But it's like I say, it's the kind of the go-to. And then the other one is this WPA3 PSK. Now this comes with some additional security features, I would say. So whereas you could say that WPA2 now is probably the baseline, so I'm just going to change my security profile to this WPA3 version. Whereas a few years ago, you'd probably say that WEP was the baseline, and then people would use WPA2 because they wanted additional security. Now I wouldn't recommend anyone uses WEP WEP anymore. But I guess the difference is we have a pre-shared key, which is still susceptible, I would say, with WPA2 to man-in-the-middle attacks, because you do have that 4-way handshake. Whereas with WPA3, your the authentication methods, the encryption, should I say, is based on a better algorithm of key exchange. So your password never is actually exposed in a way that allows any brute force or ability to use any, if you're familiar with ways of brute forcing passwords, you can just use the alphabet, the dictionary approach, where you just try every single word combination. Eventually you may get lucky, whereas this makes it near impossible to be able to do that. And the same with the encryption. This GCMP is basically a faster way to deal with those cryptos. However, not every device will support the WPA3, and I can show you what happens if you try and exclusively use that and on a legacy device. So it works exactly the same as the other one, which basically means it uses the protected management frames, which is how it stops your password ever being displayed in plain text in order for anyone to ever sniff that traffic and discover what it is. So, like I said before we're using WPA2 PSK, we're just using WPA3, and we just change that cipher to be GCMP as opposed to CCMP, and enable that, make that required for that management protection. Again, just a simple password or single password. So when I try and connect this laptop I'm on, as this straight away says can't connect to this network, I have forgotten it, so it's not trying to use an old password. But we're running with hardware that isn't obviously doesn't support WPA3 yet, because it's not AX. It's an older machine. So if I jump onto my phone, as you can see, this is a modern device, so it's got AX Wi-Fi 6 Wi-Fi device in it. So when I go hello world 1 2 3 and connect, there we go, connected. Click on that, you can see there it's got WPA personal, and if I go back onto registration, there we go, there's me connected there, and that's the WPA3 PSK that I'm using there. As you can see, my band is AX. So now if I go back to my security profile, so then if we then allow WPA2 and 3 within the same, both ciphers within the same profile, then that means legacy ones that don't support WPA3 will be able to still connect. So basically merging that 2 and 3 together. The only thing is this management protection won't work if we've only got WPA2, so we need to change from required to allowed. Okay, so we can use it if it's needed. Okay, now we go ahead and connect on this machine. Okay, and now if we go to registrations, there we go. So if I just make sure my phone would have dropped off, all I made changes, jump back on. There we go. So we're now, as you can see, my phone is on WPA3. It says on the phone 2/3 because that's the options available. But now both will work. This might cause you issues when you come to a large deployment and you're roaming between, because the older devices that are trying to authenticate, you may have some problems with fast roaming, things like that. However, if you are conscious of security, then you should always use the most secure you can. However, if you it's just for your home and you think it's not that critical, obviously security is still important at home, but less likely that you're going to be getting people trying to hack your actual Wi-Fi because they need to be within range of your Wi-Fi. Then WPA2 is probably more than adequate. Okay, so hopefully though that's clear. So WPA2, if you is your baseline, WPA3 is what you should be working towards eventually, but as you can see, you may still have a lot of AC devices out there, even less N or A on the 5 gig. Then you will need to make sure that you still allow that, or you have a separate SSID for those legacy devices if you really want to segregate it up. Okay, so that is your personal, your pre-shared key setup. So that moves us on to our PPSK, which is our personal, basically our multiple personal pre-shared key. So in a very similar way, we're going to have bring up my security groups. We're going to have a option as being WPA2 PSK. I'm going to use that one just so I can show you on the device that I'm looking at on. Instead of setting the passphrase here, we select this multicast group. Now, I recently did a video on how to set this up, and annoyingly, it was all done via CLI, and then after the video released, they came up to the newest firmware, which at the moment is 7.19.4, whereby it now becomes available on the GUI of the Winbox. So, yeah, I'll probably need to redo that video at some point. But yeah, same principles, except you can now do it all from here. So if I click on that option here, this is where we can have multiple, as you can see, multiple passwords, and we can even assign VLAN IDs. Now, the reason I've done it this way is just because it's an added little bonus, I think. As I mentioned before, my data path is is assigning my VLAN IDs, and the reason I've done it via VLANs and not just directly to traffic onto a bridge is because it would be more scalable if you're using CapsMan. So if I was to get rid of that, so get rid of 20 and just have it like that, it would use, under my configuration, under the data path, it would use what was ever set there for the SSID. However, because I want to overwrite that, I can technically get rid of this, but I still need to actually tell it what bridge to go into. So I'm just going to change that from the data path just to specify the bridge, because what the data path is doing, if you're not familiar, and again, I've got heaps of videos out there that will explain this bit better, but your data path is associating the traffic with the bridge of the device that the Wi-Fi adapters are on. So if this was an access point, a CapsMan access point, you would still need to specify the bridge, not the VLAN ID. That is all done via the CapsMan controller side. So you can either, without the VLAN ID, you just always need to put it into the bridge. So we change our configuration just to be bridge only, because then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you these two different PSKs and what happens to my traffic. So let's go ahead and change as well the security group now to be PPSK. Okay, and we'll just leave that up there so we can see how I've configured it. And just as I mentioned before, there's no passphrase there, so there's nothing on there. If these weren't set, this would fail. So Wi-Fi is getting a bit crazy because I'm connecting and disconnecting. It's trying to connect, but the password's now changed. So if I forget that, open up again. So it asks me for a password, and as you can see, I've got Hello World 20 and Hello World 30, which relate to the VLAN IDs. Now, you don't just have to have these personal per VLAN ID. These could individual people. You just add them under the same group name, and then that will be a drop-down option there. So I'll do Hello World 20 to start with. That's 12, nearly. 20. Next. Okay, connected. So if I look at my registration, you can see I've associated using WPA PSK. But if I bring up my command prompt and do ipconfig, there we go, I'm on VLAN 20. So now what happens when I forget this? Disconnect, forget, connect again. And this time I'm going to do Hello World 30. Now what's going to happen, as soon as I connect to this, I can preempt what's going to happen. It's going to open up a web page. So yeah, open up web browser. Because I'm actually running my hotspot in here, which I'm going to get to later on. But VLAN 30 is what I'm using for my hotspot. But if we do a ipconfig, you'll see that, there we go. So if I didn't have a hotspot service running on that VLAN, we would just get internet access as normal. So as you can see, I'm on two different VLANs now by simply changing that there by the different passphrase. So that's quite a handy little feature. So it means you can have the same SSID for lots of infrastructure out there. So obviously, if you're aware or you're not aware, you want to minimize the amount of SSIDs you have. Industry standard says about 6. I would say I'd go for, if you can, 4 maximum. It just reduces that noise on the RF side, because all the SSIDs are constantly going to be sending some form of broadcast beacon. So if you can have one SSID and then control what devices are on network by that, it's a handy little feature if you're using PSK. That way, if you've got some IoT devices or some printers or some stuff that you don't want access to other parts of your network, but you still want them to, they still need to connect via Wi-Fi, this way you can segregate it that way, and it still looks like from the device it's connecting on the same network as everything else. So yeah, that's PPSK, and again, it's handy now that it's available within the GUI. So now we're going to look at Enterprise. So you may or may not be aware, you've got PSK, which stands for pre-shared key, and then you have the other option of the authentication types being, open up this profile, WPA2 EAP. You've also got the option for WPA3 EAP, and effectively it uses the same authentication type, but instead of a pre-shared key, a single password, we're going to need a username and password. Now this setup is a bit more involved, and I've done a video on this. If you want to do it properly, you need to generate certificates. The certificate needs to exist between the Radius server, so whatever is being authenticating or verifying those username and passwords, against the client's certificate. Now this is used quite widely in enterprise environments, such as people running Windows AD networks, so corporate networks, where you can distribute these certificates via your AD. Now that is a lot easier than when I've done it on the in my example, because I actually had to download that certificate to my device. But it is more secure that way, because you need to have a valid certificate that can be and is signed by a signing authority, which in our case, when I did it, was the MikroTik, but you could have a Microsoft certificate authority within your network. The example I've got at the moment, I've set it all up, but I'm not using certificates. As you can see, no certificates there, just for simplicity. So it can be done simply. You just need to make sure on your device that you don't authenticate or you don't validate a certificate, which is still an option in devices, but it is being phased out. And I should imagine the rumor was that it was going to be phased out in a lot of Android devices sooner or before now, where it doesn't seem to be. There were some versions of the Pixel, which I believe are coming out, and it was going to be an option where you couldn't not validate on the client side, but still seems to be possible. So, and for this, I'm using Radius. Now let's talk a bit more about Radius. So again, I've done lots of videos about setting up the Radius side, but effectively I've got a Radius server running on an Ubuntu server. It's using free Radius, and I'm also using an SQL database to manage that. So once this all set up, you have this NAS. Basically, this is your client device, which is my MikroTik, and that's where the Radius requests are going to come from. And then you have a pre-shared key for that information between the two. And then this is where we add our user devices. So as you can see, I've got this test one here, which is just Andrew, and the password is test. And then within the MikroTik, then we set up the other side. We set up the client option here. As I mentioned, this is the device that's making the request. So that's the address of the server. That's that pre-shared key. And we select we're going to use it for wireless, which is what we're going to do for now, EAP. And I've also got it for the hotspot, which I'll show you later on. So once your Radius is set up, your security is all ready to go. And by default, if you've got the Radius and wireless ticked here, it will automatically send a Radius request as well. So what that means is when we try and connect to that network, I need to update my profile, don't I? So I want the EAP version. Okay, now when I try and connect to it, again, I'm using WPA2 because I want to show you on this device. It's going to try and connect and not get very fast, so we'll forget that. Connect again. There we go. So you can see now it's asking for username and password. So that was Andrew and test. So these are unique to the user, or should be. And click OK. So this is where we get this certificate warning. We're not using a certificate. We could connect. And connected. So now if we look at our registration, WPA2 EAP. Okay. So very simple. I've cut a few corners by not doing the certificate side of it and all that, but we are still encrypted using WPA2, so it's still secure in that respect. It's just, it means that there's less of that authentication piece when it comes between the knowing the username and password. Okay, now the reason I didn't start with the open one, which you may think is probably the simplest one because it has no security on it, is because I wanted to talk about OWE as well. And I started with PSK because PSK I thought was the most common, because you don't often have an open network, or you shouldn't do. Nowadays, the only reason you would do is if you were using something like a guest setup. Now, open, really, as you can see, would normally just have nothing set. Except I've got this option here because it ties in to what I'm going to show you with OWE. So if I remove that option there, apply that, and I go over to my main configuration and just change the security to be open, click OK. Now I'm going to try and connect. As you can see, there's no symbol there, there's no padlock symbol there, so it's just an open network. So we connect, open, simple, didn't ask me for anything. Look at registration, auth type unknown. Now that is open, that is very simple, but we're unencrypted. Our traffic isn't secured between ourselves and the router or the access point, so it's not great. It's not the sort of thing you would recommend using. So they now have this new option, which is OWE, and that is basically an encryption. There is a key exchange that happens between the client and the Wi-Fi access point, and that enables your traffic to be encrypted, even without providing any credentials. So I'll show you how that works. Now to do this, I'll re-enable that transition auto and explain what that's doing in a second. And then I go to, I'm going to open up the other security one I've got, which is OEA, and side by side you can see what these are doing. So we have OEA ticked here, we have nothing ticked here, and this is where we're going to need these second interfaces. So I'm going to enable these are just additional interfaces I've added, so I just added it like that and select the master based on the 3, this master is 1 and 4 and the master is 2, so that's 5 gig and 2.4. As you can see, it inherits the same channels. But what we're actually going to do is we're going to change this, sorry, not on here, we're going to change the configuration of this one to stay as open, and then we're actually going to enable this second profile, which I've got currently disabled, where I've just given it a random SSID because it's hidden, so it's not going to be seen, and the security is going to be the OWE. Okay, so we can go ahead and enable that, and then what we do is we apply that setup to my secondary ones. So once we've got it set up, I'll explain again. So random SSID, which isn't seen because it's hidden, is applied to the secondary ones. The primary ones are using the main SSID, but the security is open, which is so that the main one has the open one, but then it has this transition, and then the secondary one, again, it has this auto transition and is using the OEA. Now the reason we have both is, as you saw before, when I connected on this device that I'm on, the AC device I'm on, it said authentication type unknown, and I'll show you again that's what's going to happen with this one, because this needs to, not every device will support this. This is a newer, this will be basically for your Wi-Fi 6 AX stuff. So the other thing we need to make sure is we have under the configuration the same data path setup for both. Okay, so I've got, as you can see, on the same VLAN. So basically means what's going to happen is I'm going to attempt to connect. If my device doesn't support this one, it won't transition to this profile. It will stay on this one, so it needs to connect to the right network. But if it does, it will then transition to this one, which needs to be on the same one. I could get rid of this one, and then it means that all legacy devices won't work. Only you force them to use this OWE one, if that makes sense. So I'll show you what happens once I connect. So again, let's go ahead and just disconnect. Again, we'll forget. Close that, reopen it, connect again. Okay, we're connected. We go back to our registration. Okay. Type unknown. We're on the open one. Now what I've got to do is I'm going to jump on my phone again because it's the newer device. Okay, and I'll just forget this. I'll connect again. IP address. There we go. So we'll look on there. See, you can see the security is enhanced open. Now you can see up here the auth type is OWE. So AX will use this one, but AC won't. And that's why you need to make sure you get the data path set up on both profiles so you can still use the legacy ones. So one is connecting to this and one is connected to this. My phone, which is the newer one, is connecting to that. And when you look at the registration, you can see it's connecting to the that SSID, which you can't actually see when you look at the list of SSIDs because, as I mentioned before, it's hidden. So what's the use cases for this? Well, hotspot, I would say. If you're in the middle of nowhere and you don't have any concerns about what devices are connecting, then you could perhaps use that for that. But really, I would say anything where you've got another way to log in or authenticate, such as hotspot, then you would be using something like this, because that's the only other time I can think when you would use an open network. So that brings us on to our final one, which is hotspot. Now, hotspot, there's lots of ways we can configure this. There's lots of features we can add, different login pages and everything else. But again, I'm keeping this simple because I'm focusing just on giving you the different types of authentication we can use. And for this one, like most things, it would be for a guest network, I'd imagine. And for that, that's why I'm going to use my secondary SSIDs that I've created. The security, we don't have a security profile for it because technically it's going to be an open one. I could continue to use this open OWE, which would have been a follow-on from that setup, as I mentioned before when I was doing that this would mainly be used for hotspot. However, just for simplicity, I'm just going to stick to leaving it as open because I'm again using the device that doesn't have AX on it. So rather than have to keep using my phone as well. So what we're going to do is keep these ones as they are, but we're going to apply the different profile to this one. So like guest profile, as you can see, I've got a guest profile configured, which I'm just calling a different SSID guest, but all the other settings are inherited the same, and I've got nothing set for security. The only other thing is the data path, and this is where I'm using that VLAN 30s. If you remember when I was doing the PPSK and I connected to the VLAN 30 SSID or VLAN 30 password, then I was presented with that login page. So that's exactly what's going to happen now when I get on that network. So we just associate that with both of the Wi-Fi interfaces for the secondary ones. Now this is going to moan, it's got nothing to transition to, so we'll just go ahead and change that back to sorry, not in there. Not in there, sorry. We can do that in the profile. As you can see, there's lots of different ways you can configure one thing in MikroTik. It's just all about preference, really. So now I just change it in one place now. There we go. So that's gone back to my main one, has gone back to just the PSK. And the guest now is open, but it's on that VLAN 30. So that's only, from a Wi-Fi point of view, very minimal. We just need an SSID basically, and the VLAN to associate it with. The hotspot config's done under IP hotspot, and the best way to do it is to set up your network first. And like if you've ever set up DHCP, just then hit the hotspot setup, and then run through that, and it will basically ask you what interface and then the range you want to give the clients. Now you can do lots of other things with this. You can use an SSL cert, you can use a host name, which is when you get redirected to that web page is what's in the URL. Using an SSL key on a valid domain name is always better, I think, but from a user perspective, because they were more likely to trust your network. They're not going to get any SSL errors or anything like that pop up. However, I'm just doing it via IP for simplicity. I've done lots of videos on hotspot, different ways of configuring it. You've also got the option for the profiles in terms of, because we're using Radius, you can actually assign different metrics back to the client depending on what username, password they use. And again, I've done other videos for that, but we'll leave that out. But we are using the same Radius setup we did for the WPA. As you can see, I remember I said hotspot's ticked. And then under my profile, and this is my under my server profiles, this gets generated when you do that setup wizard. When you click on here, you just need to under radius tick to use radius. We don't make any other changes, and it means I can use that same username password which I specified. Which I set here. So basically what happens when you connect to this SSID, it's an open SSID. Not that one, sorry, the guest. Okay, it says it's open. Again, if I wanted to, I would use WoE as well, just so I get legacy devices connecting. You get presented with this login page, which is the default one, which is stored in MikroTik's file directory. As soon as you enable Hotspot, it gives you this directory here, and you can make changes to this directly. You can change the redirect, so it redirects to an external server, and as you can see, it now says not secure, and I'm just using an IP address now. From a client looking at this would think something's wrong or something's broken or this isn't right. So again, I would always emphasize use a proper URL domain and an SSL server. But again, check out my other videos all for that information if you're interested in setting this up. But yeah, basically just going to use that Andrew and test one again. When you connect, you are logged in. And there we go. So when I go back to my here and I go to hosts, as you can see, that's me. And active, Andrew's logged in. So very simple. Hopefully the use case for that is mainly going to be, guest access, or maybe you've got, if you're not guests, if it's in a corporate environment, you want your staff, like a BYOD, bring your own device. You want staff devices to connect and authenticate that way. But then again, if you want to provide them with a username and a password, so they're unique to every user. There's lots of different use cases, and again, as I mentioned, you can deploy this in lots of scenarios using lots of different authentication methods, also payment methods. If you wanted to sell access and you wanted it to be either someone has to go to a desk, like an admin, like a front desk, help desk or something, and actually buy credit, and you give them a token or give them username and password, or they self-serve, and then you can have like credit card payments and stuff. And there's other third-party applications that you can tee this up to do all that side of it for you. But yeah, anyway, thanks for watching. Hopefully this has been of use. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I've got that course which I set up, which if you're unfamiliar with MikroTik, it should give you enough information, certainly to deploy anything I've just shown you now. There is a large portion of it, or one of the main modules, is about Wi-Fi, as well as the VLANing side, which I think is also important, and also everything in between. So yeah, check that out. And if you want me to do a more specific video on any of these, if you've seen any on my previous video and I haven't quite explained something well enough, then please let me know, and I'm happy to redo anything or elaborate on anything at all. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.